So the first part is you see other people as objects because you're projecting parts of your bad self onto them. But then what happens is to defend yourself against these bad objects, right? These hostilities, you do what? You may become angry. You may become hostile, or very common with narcissistic individuals, dismissing. You withdraw, or you make it like someone is like, you don't really care about them. They're not too important. And in turn, what happens then, unfortunately, is this makes the other person angry at you, right? Because you're devaluing them or dismissing them, and then they're more likely to leave you. I want to keep going, but I want to pause just for a second, just to let you jump in with the first part. So the first part is this: something is going on inside this kind of person. It gets projected onto the new person, who's not really a new person entirely, because it's like this repetition compulsion. They just keep, that's why you hear some people say, oh, I can never meet a nice guy. And you have to wonder, or I always meet abusive men. That's another one. You have to wonder how much of a knack do they have for choosing these men, which is partly true. But and the other part is how much do they turn them into, not intentionally, not even consciously aware, but when you project and then you defend yourself and you withdraw or treat somebody in a hostile way, they're going to respond to that naturally, right? Because they're in this with you. Okay, but let me just breathe for a second and see what your thoughts or reactions are to that piece of it.
That makes me think this must be the reason why people with NPD are constantly seeking the perfect relationship. Mm-hmm. Because it starts out well, but then they project the negative onto the other person. Let's say they have a disagreement. Everyone has disagreements, but perhaps the person with NPD doesn't see it that way and projects their negative view of self onto this other person, or their negative introjects onto this other person. And then the relationship becomes bad.
Yep. And just to add one thing, that's exactly right. And they don't see it this way. Why? Why don't they see it as just a disagreement? Because of this whole thing about, remember, introjects and everything being in such an extreme, and because of splitting, and because of the lack of integration, like good and bad, they don't see it as just an agreement because they lose sight of all the good aspects of their partner. They just disappear. That's part of splitting. It's like it could have been there just 5 minutes ago, and they could have really appreciated you or look forward to seeing you. They love you. But when they're splitting, that disappears at that moment.
That's also why I think that oftentimes people with NPD, they don't remember that the partner did all of these nice things for them over the years. They're just remembering this impression, right?
Yep.
That they have of them that's most recent.
Yep, exactly. And I want to speak to that point in particular because you hear a lot of that. A lot of people are really confused about that piece. And then they think that, people sometimes in these relationships end up very wounded. And they question, did he ever love me? Did she really ever love me? It didn't feel like, today it doesn't seem like that, but when we went through it, it felt that way. It felt like they cared. See, but then that disappears when they get into that split state of mind. So, yeah. So here, I want to keep going if I may, and then please jump right back in. So part of this cycle, I just mentioned the projection part, right? That things inside oneself are intolerable and they put it onto somebody else. But then what happens is, and again, this is discussed far less in the content, but then you introject. So introjection is part of taking something in. So when you introject, then this new person, right? This new experience will add just more terrifying images to those that are already in you, right? Because you're having this negative experience with this person because you've projected all these parts of yourself onto them. So what happens then is the introjects that are already inside of you, like your inner world, we could just say, remains exactly as it was before. Nothing changes. Why does nothing change? Because you took in then another bad experience. You ended up with another abusive person. So what happens is the external object, and yes, we're using the word object because they're not a whole person yet, right? Because remember, you see them as like a caricature, only the worst aspects of them. So the external object is felt as dangerous and destructive once more, and then that causes you to adopt an even more aggressive and destructive attitude towards that person in self-defense, right? Because if they're so destructive and angry, which again is the projection, now you got to defend yourself. So now that's why it's a cycle, because now you got to, it's like, I don't know if you've heard this expression, but there's this old expression, the best defense is a strong offense. So like if you go at them strong, this just perpetuates this vicious cycle. And what never happens, unfortunately, which is in the normal course of development, this is early in life, because these problems start early in life, as you know, Lisa, and we discussed in our prior meeting. And early in life, if things go well, positive feelings predominate, and this leads to an attitude towards others that's more friendly. And accordingly, this friendly, warm experience will be introjected. So now you take in, when things go well, these really comforting, soothing, we called it the maternal smile in the prior video. And then what happens is, accordingly, the inner world then becomes populated with, more loving, comforting figures. But for those who are suffering with personality disorders, because of the early childhood frustrations, the deprivations, all the things we spoke about, they remain stuck in this unintegrated level, this fragmented sense of self. This is the splitting. And then there's an excess, let's say, of this destructive self. That's the part the first part of your question now, is do they treat themselves as an object, right? And to some extent, yes.